Hello, we're talking about this book today. It's called Is There Rush Hour in a Third World Country by Rogelio. I was very tempted to say Rogelio, but no, it's Rogelio Braga, who is an author from the Philippines. I'm really sorry if my background is kind of boring. I'm sitting at my desk today because I wanted to read a couple of things out as I'm reviewing this book because I think, first of all, my brain is too I will not remember all of this information just like that. I didn't want to read off of a paper, but I wanted to be very accurate with the references where I'm getting all of this information, so bear with me. But anyways, this is my first time reading a book by a Filipino author, and if you guys don't know my boyfriend, I wouldn't say he's from the Philippines. His parents, I guess, entire ancestry is from the Philippines. His parents moved to the UK before he was born, so he was born here and he's a Londoner through and through. But it did get me thinking that I can't be sitting here talking about the fact that I'm really interested in Southeast Asian or East Asian literature without really reading from some of those countries, and Philippines is definitely one of them. Hear me out, I'm not really disinterested in any country as such, but there are so many countries where it's really hard to get your hands on like a critically acclaimed or any book at all, because there it just isn't a lot of interest in translating those works, and a lot of like recent publishing houses are changing that, and they are putting the time and effort and money into translating some really cool books from those places. But I feel like this is definitely one of those, and I'm really happy that I was recommended this book by someone, but I'm really happy that I got my hands on it. So let's talk about it. This is a translated short story collection. This is a really raw and real representation of a lot of people who are living in the Philippines. It talks about so many different aspects of society and at different levels that from the very beginning, each and every story felt like a true sucker punch. Like honestly, it was just so hard to read this. And as someone who grew up in India, I feel like the visuals were even stronger for me because none of this, like I grew up seeing all of this happen, and I'm very, like hyper aware of all the privileges that I live in London. And I always feel like because I grew up seeing so much of that life that I can never truly become disillusioned, because I just feel like everything is really temporary, and then once you experience something like that, you cannot fully ever grasp how lucky you are. And like I'm never gonna stop being grateful for what I have because of the upbringing I had. But reading this book was definitely a reminder that that is very much the truth of the world. Before I kind of sat down to review this, I did a bit of research into like third world country. What does that mean? Is Philippines a third world country? Is India a third world country? Because to me, my own ancestry and upbringing obviously gives me a lot of context. Apparently, after India gained independence from the British in 1947, India was considered to be a third world country, but right now it's a developing country, almost close to becoming one of the kind of major, I guess, powers in the world, basically becoming one of the more economically dominant countries in the world. It's on the way, it's not there yet, okay? That's what I got from multiple sources on the internet. But Philippines so far is very much considered still a third world country. And I come from a part of India, Assam to be specific, which is quite rural in some ways, but also not, because it's very developed, people are very educated, but a lot of people still don't know that Assam exists, which is really frustrating. But it's a very, very beautiful part. Like Northeast in general, India is a very beautiful part of India. People are highly educated, highly capable. There's so much amazing culture, history packed into that region. But we are also very close to nature. We're also very close to our roots, and people live, at least then when I was growing up, it's very different today. It's changed hugely, but I'm talking about 20 years ago, if not 25 years ago. It would probably have been the time where I got to experience India as it's still kind of developing. There's so many aspects of this book, and I'm like, if that's third world, then I don't know how where I grew up was any different, because people very much go through those struggles when I grew up, and I've seen this firsthand, right? So it's a very soft line between what people categorize, and that's why it got me interested to look up what is third world in the first place. So I didn't know this, but apparently the term third world was originally coined in the times of the Cold War to distinguish those nations that are neither aligned with the West, the NATO, or aligned with the East, the communist bloc. So basically, all these countries had power over these other countries, and those were the third world. I mean, not exactly, but you get the point. Today, the term is often used to describe the developing countries of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Australia. In many ways, it's a term used to describe or identify countries with substandard, underdeveloped, or underperforming conditions in certain fields. And this article that I'm currently reading, which is it's nationsonline.org, they basically said that they're classifying in this article third world countries by various categories. So third world in terms of national gross income, third world in terms of human development, third world in terms of poverty, third world in terms of freedom of press. And all of these countries have varying levels of freedom and liberty and human rights, etc. So it's all different. And I feel like that's where I can draw a distinction between maybe where I grew up in India and Philippines, because I feel like India very much, we still had freedom of press, and at least when I was growing up, it was quite a free liberal country with a lot of sovereignty and a lot of pride in having a very mixed society and culture. I know that India's progressed in a very different light today, but today we're not talking about India, we're talking about Philippines. But anyways, I wanted to draw that comparison because I just wanted to be honest about the fact that a lot of this reading was in context that I am Indian and I have grown up in a certain society that I cannot fail to draw parallels or compare. All of that out of the way, I also want to talk about the author himself because I think it's really interesting, his background. So Rogelio Braga is an exiled playwright, essayist, and political activist from the Philippines. They published 2 novels, a collection of short stories, and a book of plays before they left the Philippines in 2018. Unable to return home due to the deteriorating state of human rights and freedom of expression in Philippines, Braga is the first Filipino writer who fled to the United Kingdom seeking protection from persecution, state harassment, and censorship since Duterte came into power in 2016. They were a fellow of the Asian Cultural Council for Theatre in Southeast Asia in 2016 and the recipient of the Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Literature for their fiction. So you can see that this author, he's not just kind of writing these stories because he thinks that it will get people's attention or is like interesting for people who don't maybe experience this on a daily basis. He's very much trying to be the voice for a lot of people in Philippines who don't have that voice. And I think freedom of press is one of those things that you cannot take lightly, and it really shines through in his book. From, there's this story right at the beginning where you get to hear someone's perspective of like job security and how different generations are suffering from, different levels of education and just the way they're treated in the job environment, and how like small you're made to feel in the corporate world in Philippines. At the same time, you get to hear the story of 2 girls who live in the slums in Philippines, and for them the most magical thing in the world is this thing that they find that is so freaking mundane to the rest of the world, and like when you figure out what that is, it breaks your heart. So many stories here are just like, you cannot sit through this in one go because it will be really hard. Some of them I even made Marco kind of read to me. I read to him because I thought it'll be interesting to get his perspective. And he also said like the picture or like the whole story, all the stories were so vivid of the time that he himself went back to Philippines and he saw his family or his extended family have had their own struggles. So a lot of the times you can see that kind of coming through because nobody's experience is isolated in a way. Like in a way we're all our stories are intertwined, and if someone is suffering, we're bound to kind of be able to see through that pain and what's causing it. And I think this book really puts light on like, you can see that different people are struggling, but most of the time that struggle is not drawn that line is not drawn very clearly on what's leading to that struggle, but this book does that so well. Personally, I didn't really read this book as fiction. I read it very much as like just documentary style, because I feel like I refuse to believe that these are made up stories. I feel like this guy has probably had thousands of interactions with different people from kind of different backgrounds and different walks of life, and he's witnessed so much, and these are just accounts of what he's seen firsthand. That's what I would like to believe, because like some of these are just bizarre. And like I love the fact that the translator Christine on Muslim, she kept those like small, like maybe because I have a very close friend who's from Philippines, my partner's from Philippines, I'm very like I have so many people in my life that are from the Philippines, so I'm very familiar with some of the words, like what they used to refer to family members, mom, dad, some curse words. I'm familiar with that. She kept those words and it made the experience even better. I think that was such a good part of the translation. And even though I was reading a translated piece of work, I felt it felt very authentic. The tone, the style, even the manner of speech, you know. And I feel like sometimes that's lost in translation, but that's definitely not in the case. One very big critique I do have to give you, that there are one or two short stories that I did skip, because towards the end I feel like, you know, the tempo really picked up in the beginning, and towards the end some of them I found it difficult to get through, not because they were dark or anything. I just found a few of them, like the subject matter was not very interesting. I can't really tell you why. When you read it, you'll see like every single story could be a different book in it of its own. So some of them, there's one about like a reggae music bar, and it just didn't grip me, and I'm not the kind of person who'll continue reading if I don't enjoy it, which is why everything you hear from me on my channel is like 100% authentic. I'll never put myself through the kind of trauma of reading a book that I'm not enjoying. So I did skip one or two stories. Not many, but I just did feel like the tempo did kind of drop as we progressed through the stories, because it was not about the shock value. Like some of them were really subtle in the beginning, but they said a really interesting story. And I am fully open to, you know, admitting that it might be because that I'm fully open to also agreeing, if anyone brings up this criticism of me, that I might not have related to those stories because I'm only somewhat familiar with Filipino culture, right? So had I been very familiar with all aspects of Filipino culture, I might have related to all the stories in a different level, but I could only relate to the ones that I viewed from my context and my background. So there are certain ones that I didn't really understand, and I think that's why I couldn't really get into it. But that's not because the story was not good, it was because from my context I really didn't know how to connect with it. And I think this is like one, I guess, you know, general critique you can put out there of like why people are maybe disinterested in reading Asian fiction or translated fiction unless they're from there, because to a certain degree it becomes difficult to relate to certain backgrounds. But I've read books by authors from like Trinidad and Tobago or Vietnam or even North Korea, South Korea. I feel like to a certain degree I can connect with all of those books. And even when I read books by Virginia Woolf or Plato, I still connect. So I don't really see that happening all the time, but I do agree that sometimes it can happen, that a bit of context really helps. I bought mine on Amazon because I couldn't find it in any of the kind of mainstream bookstores or independent stores in the UK. Not that I looked wherever I looked. But yeah, get your hands on this. I'll leave the link down below. And if you enjoyed the review, then do follow me for more reviews. But if you have any like this, I know I say this all the time, but I'm really struggling to find Filipino authors and books that are like, you know, if you follow me, you know what kind of books I like. Please let me know if you have any recommendations. My boyfriend is not much of a reader. Neither are most Filipinos that I know, very sadly. They're not like very much into Filipino literature. So if you guys have any recommendations, let me know. But that is there rush hour in a third world country? I know I didn't really go into many of the stories or give you a very in-depth review of this book, but I really wanted to just give you an overall grasp on what the book, like what the subject matter is, and a little bit of an understanding on what the themes are. There are many themes to do with war, to do with society, to do with politics. There's a lot of politicians mentioned in this book, a lot of soft themes, and the way that he so delicately dealt with these soft themes is what makes it even better. So if you do read it, please come back and let me know what you thought. But yeah, that's all for today. I'll see you next time. Bye.